Professor Moniz, welcome to the Science Business Conference.
Thank you, Richard.
I would let's just start with a very simple question. Politics. I just mentioned the transition from Trump to Biden. If you care about climate, R&D and climate change, deployment of technologies, is there going to be a big change? What does it mean for the world?
Well, politics, as you know, is always a simple question with a complicated answer. But the simple part of the answer is yes. There will be a major change, and I think it's already in motion. Clearly, you mentioned that we are back in the Paris Agreement. That's, in some sense, the old news. What I would say in terms of indicative of the major shift is, first of all, I think it's worth noting that Biden, as a candidate, the Democratic Party, during the election, reached the conclusion for the first time that climate was a winning political issue in a campaign. That's really a big deal. And I think it's very indicative of clearly a major shift in the body politic, that it would be viewed as a winning political issue in a campaign.
Let's focus on let's move to the technology then, the R&D, the technology things. I mean, then if we are trying to do something as quickly as possible about climate change, what are the 2 or 3 key technologies that you think we ought to be paying more attention to in R&D?
Before I get to specific technologies, let me say one thing that I think is extremely important in the dialogue within the United States, within the European Union, with really everyone heading to Glasgow. And that is that we should have as a principle in looking at the innovation agenda, optionality and flexibility. In other words, what I mean by that is we need every single arrow in the quiver that we can develop. The solutions to low carbon, to mitigating climate risk, are going to look very, very different in different countries, in different parts of the world, in countries at different levels of economic development, industrialized to least developed. Frankly, within my country, within the United States, regionally, there will be very, very different low carbon solutions. Therefore, we need to offer everybody every low carbon tool. Not that they will all be used everywhere. That's a fallacy. It's to allow everybody to have maximum optionality and flexibility. And I'll give a clear example. I'll give 2 examples, which kind of gets into the issue of areas of emphasis. One is, we know that within Europe, parts of Europe for sure, there is a phobia about developing advanced nuclear power technologies. That's a dreadful mistake, because some places are going to need that as part of their solution. Another.
So wait a minute, you're telling Angela Merkel that she's wrong?
I'm telling whoever holds that position is absolutely wrong. I am not saying that Angela Merkel or Germany is somehow going to use nuclear power. I believe Germany will not use nuclear power, and that's fine. But one should not be in any way retarding the essential RD&D, research, development, demonstration, and deployment of the very interesting advanced nuclear technologies.
If France wants to continue pursuing the nuclear avenue, then you think that's fine? They should.
Well, France, the United States, Canada, Japan, China, Korea, we could go on. And I'm sure, frankly, that there will be a number of European countries, not just in Western Europe, but in Eastern Europe, that are very interested in the so-called small modular technologies that are being developed in nuclear. We know that there's significant interest in the Middle East, for example, in some of those technologies, which can have very good safety and security um, uh, characteristics. Another area I was about to say is carbon capture and sequestration, and different but sometimes overlapping carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere and the upper levels of the ocean. There is another argument that I believe is absolutely wrong-headed, that somehow supporting the development of carbon capture and sequestration, the development of carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere, is supporting the continued use of fossil fuels. Well, first of all, the question is about carbon in the atmosphere. It's not about what the fuel is. Some places are going to need this, but I think the easiest way to point out what I believe is the complete wrong-headedness of these kinds of arguments is, let's take carbon dioxide removal. Removing carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere,
Yeah.
whether it was put there last week or last century. We are increasingly, that is, we collectively are increasingly adopting, and I think quite appropriately, the net zero by mid-century goal as being essential to
Net
where we
zero emissions, carbon emissions, yes.
net zero carbon emissions, or net zero greenhouse gas emissions,
Yes.
to be more precise, by say 2050. But clearly, the real goal is, say, net zero at some point in time around mid-century, and then continuing on to net negative emissions. We want a net negative emissions economy, certainly in the second half of this century. Well, a net negative emissions economy, by definition, needs substantial negative carbon technologies. It's a tautology. You can't have net negative emissions without net negative technologies being deployed. Well, that's what CDR, carbon dioxide removal, is.
But how do we avoid a fight about who owns the new climate technologies?
No, so now on the climate technologies, you don't have some of those characteristics in the vaccines, but I believe there are areas like carbon dioxide removal. I'll keep using that as a good example, where I refer to that as a common good technology, one that I think can be very, very rapidly spread because, of course, this carbon dioxide removal can be done geographically anywhere that is most appropriate. Whereas I think if it comes to something like, say, a battery, a new battery chemistry, et cetera, well, let's face it, that has enormous commercial value. It will have strong IP protection. And I think the issue there is going to be for the deployment in the less developed economies. There will be a combination of two things. One is the batteries have to be the new battery, the magic new battery technology. Perhaps it's far less expensive than lithium-ion batteries, for example, without requiring any kind of rare or quasi-rare metals and minerals. But second, I think, and this goes to Glasgow and to previous meetings, Paris and Copenhagen, we, the industrialized world, need to get serious about the $100 billion a year fund that we committed to for helping the developing world develop industrially and do it in as sustainable a way as possible. So I think that's the reality, that it's going to be, that there will be the IP protections for those technologies, but we have to help actively distribute them to where they make a difference in sustainable economic growth of the developing world. The reality is, if we are going to move as quickly as possible, we are going to have to do what is very hard work of putting together broad political coalitions, without which the kinds of transformations we're talking about are very hard to come by. And by that, I mean, for example, labor and business. We mentioned earlier business. If business isn't part of the coalition, uh, that's a big headwind to fight. If jobs aren't created, that's a big headwind to fight. If we don't worry about not just stranded assets, of utilities, for example, but also stranded people, stranded communities, we're going to have a big headwind. So we need to we need religious leaders, we need military leaders. So coalitions are critical. Coalitions and regionality reinforces again the words I used earlier: optionality and flexibility. If you don't permit, if you start saying no rather than yes to what might be part of the solution to low carbon, you fracture coalitions rather than forge them. So all of this hangs together, and there's more, but that's how we structure the background of a Green Deal or a Green Real Deal, et cetera. Now, in terms of your specific question, in terms of the Horizon Fund, I think Europe needs more. As I said, both the United States and Europe have increased the funding over 5 years, over 6 years, in fact, not by 100%, but by about 40 plus percent. I think we need to catch up. And frankly, I think we need to like triple the amount of funding that we had. As I said, this has to be a decade of supercharged innovation. What do I mean by that? We have major goals. Europe, for example, has announced a 55% reduction goal by 2030. I haven't seen the plan to get there. And the United States is going to come out with a new goal by Earth Day. And I suspect it will be very close, at least, to the European goal. Um, uh, and we don't have a plan as to how to get to 55% either at this stage. But what I would say is essential, whether it's for 2030 or for 2035, 2040, 2050, we do not have all the tools that we need for net zero. We are going to need innovation. And for those innovations to scale by 2050, we need to know which of the dogs can hunt by 2030. So this is the time when we need to really juice up that innovation agenda and get through research, development, demonstration, and some deployment by 2030, or it isn't going to be able to do the job of massive deployment by mid-century.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Moniz.